Snow Falls like the North was a realm of breathtaking contradiction, fierce and beautiful, cruel yet sacred. The land itself seemed to breathe in rhythms older than the men who walked it. Mountains rose like the bones of sleeping giants, their peaks crowned in snow that never melted. Between them ran valleys carved by rivers that sang to the sea. The fjords, deep and cold, reflected the sky like polished glass. And in the long silence of winter, when the sun barely rose and shadows stretched without end, even the wind spoke softly, as if afraid to disturb the slumber of the gods. Life here was a constant negotiation between survival and reverence. The people of the North knew hardship not as tragedy, but as a companion. They built their homes close to the earth, thatched roofs huddled beneath the weight of snow, walls lined with fur and firelight. The hearth was the heart of every dwelling, where families gathered to share warmth, stories, and silence. The crackle of wood was more than sound. It was the pulse of endurance. Every ember felt like a promise that life, however fragile, would continue through another night. Outside, the world belonged to the elements: wind, stone, and sea. Men rose before dawn to tend to their animals, mend their tools, and prepare their ships for the endless cycles of travel and trade. The sea was both giver and taker, a living god that rewarded courage and punished carelessness. It could cradle a boat one day and swallow it whole the next. To the Vikings, the ocean was a mirror of fate itself, vast, unpredictable, and bound by no man's will. When the longships returned from voyages, the villages came alive with the sound of horns and laughter. The smell of salt and tar mingled with the scent of roasted meat. Children ran to meet their fathers. Women greeted them with relief that could not always be spoken. Yet even in moments of celebration, there was an awareness that joy was fleeting. Every return was a victory borrowed from death, every feast a fragile reprieve from hunger. The North demanded humility. It gave nothing freely, and every comfort had to be earned with blood, toil, or sacrifice. The people believed deeply in omens: the flight of ravens, the crack of thunder, the shimmer of the aurora across the night sky. To them, the gods were not distant. They were woven into the fabric of every breath. Thor's hammer echoed in the storms, Odin's wisdom whispered through the wind, and Freya's tears fell with the first thaw of spring. The world was alive with presence, and every action, no matter how small, carried spiritual weight. To strike an enemy, to share bread, to light a fire, all were offerings to unseen eyes. In such a place, faith was not practiced. It was lived. Amid this world of endurance and devotion, the Viking people shaped their identity. They were explorers, farmers, craftsmen, poets, and warriors all at once. Their sagas celebrated valor and vengeance, but also the quiet dignity of those who endured. The same man who sailed to distant shores might spend the winter carving runes or singing lullabies to his children. Their strength was not found in brutality alone, but in their acceptance of life's balance, that every victory demanded loss, and every birth carried the shadow of death. In the dim glow of their longhouses, evenings unfolded like living poetry. Skalds recited tales of gods and kings while firelight danced across faces lined by time and weather. The words carried warmth deeper than the flames. They spoke of courage, of loyalty, and of the fate that bound all things together. For in the North, men were not masters of destiny. They were threads in a vast tapestry, each life woven into the next. The belief in fate gave meaning to suffering and dignity to struggle. To live honorably even in failure was to live well. Winter was both enemy and teacher. It taught patience, resilience, and respect for the unseen. When the sun vanished for weeks, the line between life and death blurred. The world seemed suspended between moments, and dreams often felt as real as waking life. Some said that in those long dark months, the veil between the living and the dead grew thin. The ancestors were close, their presence felt in the creak of timbers or the flicker of flame. The living spoke to them in silence, seeking guidance, forgiveness, or simply the comfort of knowing they were not alone. It was in this world that Einar lived, a man shaped not only by battle but by the rhythms of nature itself. Each morning he would stand by the edge of the fjord, watching the mists rise like spirits from the sea. He understood that the land gave as much as it took, and that its beauty was a test as much as a gift. To survive here was to learn to see meaning in everything, in the tracks of a wolf, in the cry of a gull, in the stillness between storms. The North was not a backdrop to his story. It was its soul. The seasons marked time in circles, not lines. Spring brought the melt and the return of color, a fragile reminder that life could still bloom after the cold. Summer was short but golden, a fevered rush of light and labor when every hour mattered. Autumn came like a sigh, the forests glowing with red and amber as the people prepared once again for the silence of snow. And then winter returned, patient and merciless, a reminder that the gods never promised ease. In this eternal rhythm, the people of the North found harmony. They did not seek to conquer the world, only to live in balance with it. Yet, within that balance, there was always tension, between strength and compassion, tradition and change, vengeance and forgiveness. It was in that tension that true stories were born. Stories like Einar's. For within a world that demanded hard hearts, he carried one that could still feel. Among men who worshipped the sword, he dared to believe in peace. He was a child of the storm, yet his soul longed for calm waters. And though he did not know it yet, that longing would lead him toward a destiny that defied every law of his time. As the fire burned low and the wind whispered through the cracks of the hall, one could almost hear the North itself speaking, a voice older than memory, patient and vast. It spoke of the beauty in endurance, of love hidden beneath hardship, and of men like Einar, who walked the line between legend and loss. The world of the North was not merely where his story began. It was the reason it could exist at all, a place where even beneath the ice, something warm and human could still survive. Slow-burning embers from a pale, endless sky. The fjords sleep beneath a shroud of mist, their dark waters breathing in rhythm with the wind. The night carries no sound but the sigh of the sea and the distant creak of frozen pine. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the echoes of old songs still drift, fragments of stories the world has long forgotten. Among them is one tale that the skalds never wrote, a story too tender for war and too sorrowful for song. It is the story of a Viking who loved his enemy, a flame that burned quietly beneath the ice. Imagine standing on that northern shore, where time feels slower and the air is thick with memory. The waves move as if reluctant to break, whispering against stones polished by centuries. The world feels both alive and ancient, and the silence itself seems to listen. You can almost sense the ghosts of longships that once cut across these same waters, vessels of oak and iron, filled with men who carried both sword and sorrow. Among them once stood a man named Einar, whose name is nearly lost to history. But the wind remembers him, and tonight, so will we. In this frozen land, courage was measured not by mercy, but by the steel of one's resolve. The North was not a place of softness. It was forged by storms, ruled by hunger, and blessed by the gods only when they saw fit. Men were taught to fight from the moment they could lift a blade, and women learned early that survival meant strength. Love, in such a place, was often quiet, a warmth hidden in the spaces between hardship. And yet, it was there, flickering beneath every oath and battle cry, waiting to defy even the coldest hearts. Einar was born into that world, where every dawn carried both beauty and threat. He was not the loudest of warriors, nor the most cruel. His eyes held the calm of deep water, still on the surface, yet unfathomable in depth. His people called him loyal, disciplined, dependable. But those who looked longer saw something else, something unspoken. He carried a stillness that unsettled men who thrived on rage. He did not fight for glory, nor to prove himself. He fought because life in the North left no other choice. The old sagas speak of heroes who sought immortality through violence, but Einar never cared for such things. He believed that every act, even in battle, left a mark upon the soul, and that the gods weighed those marks in silence. Perhaps that belief made him different. Perhaps it doomed him. For in a world that worshipped vengeance, Einar's quiet sense of mercy was its own kind of rebellion. The story you are about to hear is not one of victory or conquest. It is not sung in the great halls or carved into stone. It belongs to the spaces between legends, to the hearts that beat softly beneath the roar of war. It begins in the years when the Sagas were still young, when men still believed their names could outlive death if only they fought bravely enough. And yet, even then, there were those who found courage not in battle, but in compassion. Einar's story is one of those rare and fragile truths that survived only in whispers, carried by wind and memory. Some say the gods watched him closely, curious about the mortal who hesitated before striking down his foes. Others say the Norns, the weavers of fate, placed love in his path to test the strength of his heart. Whatever the truth, it began on a winter's night much like this one, when snow buried the world in silence and the stars glimmered like frost upon the heavens. The sea was still, the land asleep, and Einar stood alone by the shore, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his mind caught between duty and a longing he could not name. In that moment he could not have known what awaited him, that his life, so rooted in order and loyalty, would soon unravel like an unspooled thread. That the enemy he was raised to hate would become the soul he could not live without. That every oath, every promise made in the name of honor, would be tested against the only thing more powerful than fear, love. And that his choice would one day vanish from the sagas, as if the world itself had chosen to forget it. But memory has a way of surviving in places we least expect. It lingers in the quiet hum of the ocean, in the rustle of pine needles, in the hush of snow falling on empty fields. The North remembers. The wind carries stories that the skalds dared not tell, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear them, faint, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the earth. They tell of Einar and the woman from the enemy shore. They tell of the night when mercy was mistaken for treason, and love became an act of defiance. As we begin this journey, close your eyes and let the world of the North take shape in your mind. Feel the cold air against your skin, hear the distant call of ravens circling above the fjord, see the flicker of torchlight upon frozen stone. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat belongs to a time when men lived by the sword but dreamed of peace. And among them walked one man who dared to listen to that dream, even when the world told him not to. This is his story, not as the sagas wrote it, but as the wind remembers. It is a story not of gods or glory, but of the fragile, enduring fire within the human heart. The kind that burns quietly, even in the coldest dark. The kind that defies silence, death, and time itself. The kind that once made a Viking love his enemy. Einar's story began not in triumph, but in quiet endurance. He was born in a narrow valley where the mountains met the sea, in a home built from driftwood and stone. His mother was a healer, known for her calm hands and her way of listening to the wind before she spoke. His father, a warrior of the Jarl's retinue, was a man of few words, his face marked by the scars of raids fought far from home. Einar inherited his mother's silence and his father's strength, a combination that made him both respected and misunderstood among his kin. From the beginning, there was something watchful about him, a stillness that seemed to listen to the world rather than rush to fill it with noise. As a boy, Einar learned to fight before he learned to read the runes. In the north, there was no childhood without hardship. The fjord was both teacher and threat. He learned to row against the biting wind, to gut fish with numb fingers, to hunt in the forests where wolves waited beyond sight. But in the stillness between storms, when the sea lay calm and silver under the summer sun, he would sit by the water's edge and carve figures into wood, not gods or warriors, but animals, birds, and faces he could not name. There was gentleness in his hands, a patience that seemed out of place in a world of iron and vengeance. His mother would watch him from the doorway, her eyes knowing more than she said. "You see too deeply, Einar," she told him once. "Men who see too deeply often walk alone." He didn't understand then, but her words stayed with him long after she was gone. When sickness took her during one of the harsh winters, he sat by her side until her breath faded, and from that moment, silence became his closest companion. His father did not weep, men of the north seldom did, but he placed his axe in Einar's hands and said, "Now you are the strength of this house." Einar took the weapon, but he never forgot the warmth that had been lost. By the time he reached manhood, he had the bearing of a seasoned warrior, tall, broad-shouldered, his movements measured and deliberate. Yet those who fought beside him noticed that he never struck without reason. He was precise where others were reckless, restrained where others were furious. He fought as though he understood the weight of every life he took. The men respected him, but they also found him difficult to read. In a culture that celebrated loud boasts and fierce laughter, Einar's quiet was its own kind of defiance. When he joined his Jarl's raiding party for the first time, the sea greeted him with a storm that seemed determined to test every soul aboard. The longship heaved and groaned beneath the waves as lightning split the horizon. Many of the younger men shouted to the gods in fear, but Einar remained still, his hands steady on the oar. When the storm finally broke, he looked to the clouds and whispered a simple prayer, not for victory, but for understanding. To him, the sea was not a battlefield, but a mirror. It reflected back whatever lived inside the hearts of men. The raids themselves were brutal, as they always were. Villages burned, steel met flesh, and the smell of blood mingled with smoke. Einar fought because his Jarl commanded it, because that was the way of things. Yet even in battle, he felt a distance from the chaos, as though he were watching from outside his own body. When the fighting ended, and others celebrated their spoils, he found himself wandering the shore alone, staring at the waves. "You fight like a man searching for peace," one of his companions told him. Einar only nodded. He did not know how to explain that the killing, however necessary, left him hollow. Over time, he became known not just for his skill with the sword, but for his sense of judgment. Men came to him for counsel, drawn by his quiet certainty. He spoke little, but when he did, others listened. He had a way of seeing the truth beneath anger, the pain beneath pride. The Jarl himself once remarked that Einar had the soul of a seer trapped in a warrior's body. Yet in a world where honor was earned through conquest, such a soul was both gift and burden. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when his heart softened enough to glimpse another life, one not ruled by blood or oath. During the long winters, he would tend to the fires of the hall while others drank and sang. Sometimes, he would catch sight of children playing by the hearth, their laughter echoing through the smoky air, and feel an ache he could not name. It was as if some part of him yearned for something the North did not offer: peace, perhaps, or love, or simply a gentler way of being. Yet he knew that such dreams had no place in the sagas of men like him. His friendship with Arvid began during one of those winters. Arvid was everything Einar was not: loud, impulsive, full of laughter that turned to fury in an instant. They were opposites, yet inseparable. Together, they fought side by side in raids, shared bread in silence, and swore the blood oath that bound warriors closer than kin. Einar found comfort in that bond. It gave his life shape and meaning. But somewhere beneath the surface, he sensed the shadow of a choice he had not yet made, a path that would one day lead him away from everything he knew. As the years passed, Einar's name carried quiet weight. He was trusted by his Jarl, respected by his peers, and feared by his enemies. Yet the respect felt hollow. He saw men kill for gold, for glory, for vengeance, and each time, it seemed to him that the gods turned their faces away. He began to wonder whether the sagas truly told the whole truth. Was valor only found in death? Or could it also exist in mercy, in restraint, in the courage to lay down the blade? These questions took root in him like seeds buried beneath snow. They did not grow quickly, but they endured. And when fate finally placed before him the one person who would test every conviction he held, those seeds would bloom into something both beautiful and devastating. He did not yet know her name, nor the cost of meeting her. For now, he was only a man of the North, loyal, quiet, and unbroken. But deep within that stillness, something restless was stirring, waiting for the moment when the heart would awaken and change the course of his life forever. Brotherhood in the North was not a bond of words but of blood, forged in battle and tested in silence. Among warriors, trust was sacred, a thread spun tighter than kinship, for a man could choose his sworn brother but not the family he was born into. To fight side by side, to guard each other's back beneath a rain of arrows, was to share something that neither gold nor glory could equal. It was said that a man who broke his oath to his brother cursed not only himself but his entire bloodline. In such a world, loyalty was life itself. And for Einar, that loyalty found its truest reflection in Arvid. Arvid was fire to Einar's ice, reckless, fierce, and restless as the sea. His laughter could fill a hall, and his temper could empty it just as fast. He fought with the joy of one who loved danger, who needed it the way others needed breath. While Einar moved like a steady tide, Arvid was a storm, unpredictable but alive. Together they formed a balance that made their war band stronger. Men trusted them, not only because they were skilled but because together they were unbreakable. Where Einar brought discipline, Arvid brought daring. Where Arvid leapt, Einar steadied him. Their friendship was a harmony of opposites, the kind that only war could create. They had met years earlier during a campaign along the western coasts. Arvid, then young and brash, had challenged a veteran twice his size to a drunken brawl. It ended with broken ribs, not Arvid's but the other man's. Einar, who had watched quietly from the shadows, saw something rare in the boy's defiance, not arrogance, but the raw courage of someone who refused to yield. Later, when an ambush scattered their band, it was Einar who pulled Arvid from the river where he'd fallen, wounded and near frozen. From that night they were bound. When they swore their blood oath beneath the cold northern stars, each promised the other this: to fight, to live, and to die together, should fate demand it. Their bond deepened through years of shared hunger, laughter, and loss. Around the campfire, Arvid would speak of dreams, of becoming a jarl, of carving his name into the sagas so that no generation could forget him. Einar would listen in silence, occasionally smiling at his friend's fire. He did not mock Arvid's ambition, though he did not share it. For Einar, the measure of a man was not in how loudly he was remembered, but in how quietly he endured. Yet even he could not deny the comfort of Arvid's presence, the warmth of his laughter after long battles, the trust that needed no explanation. In Arvid's company, Einar felt the rarest of things in the north, belonging. It was Arvid who taught Einar to drink deep and sing louder, to let the world slip away for a moment's peace. He would slap Einar's shoulder and say, "The gods gave us hearts to beat, not to brood. You think too much. One day, that'll be your undoing." Einar would only nod, not realizing how prophetic those words would become. Beneath his calm, he carried a stillness that was both shield and wound. He loved his brother in arms, but there were thoughts he could never share, the dreams that haunted him, the feeling that the path they walked might lead not to honor, but to ruin. In the longhouse, when winter winds howled outside, the warriors gathered to boast of raids past and victories yet to come. Horns clashed, mead spilled, and songs rose to the rafters. Einar sat beside Arvid, content to listen. He would watch the faces lit by firelight, the same faces that turned hard and merciless in battle, and feel a quiet sadness. These men, fierce as wolves, would die for glory, and perhaps be sung of for a generation. But what came after the song? What remained when the fire burned out? He never asked aloud. Some truths, he knew, were not meant to be spoken. Their brotherhood was tested in small ways first, skirmishes fought in the rain, losses buried without words. Once, when an ambush left Einar with an arrow lodged in his shoulder, it was Arvid who dragged him from the field, his own arm bleeding, refusing to let him fall. Another time, when a rival band accused Arvid of betrayal, it was Einar who stepped between them, his calm voice and steady gaze silencing the hall. They had saved each other more times than either could count. Their loyalty was not declared in oaths anymore. It lived in their actions, in the trust that ran deeper than fear. But loyalty in the north was never free of shadow. It demanded obedience, to one's jarl, to the code of vengeance, to the gods themselves. And beneath that code, mercy had no place. Einar felt this tension growing within him, though he kept it hidden. He had seen too much killing, too much blind devotion to blood feuds that no one remembered the cause of. Arvid, however, believed wholly in the old ways. To him, vengeance was justice, and war was truth. When Einar spoke once of mercy, sparing a wounded man who had dropped his weapon, Arvid had looked at him as if he'd spoken heresy. Mercy, he said, is for men who fear the gods, not those who serve them. Einar had said nothing, but the silence between them had grown heavier since that night. They still fought together, still laughed, but the edges had changed. Where once there had been only trust, now there was the faint hum of something unspoken, a difference in how they saw the world. Neither man knew it yet, but that difference would become a chasm, deep enough to swallow everything they had built. As seasons passed, their Jarl began to call upon them more often, sending them to settle disputes between rival clans. They were a symbol, balance between fury and reason, fire and stone. Together, they brought victory. Together, they made their lord's name feared across the coast. Yet every victory left Einar quieter. He began to sense that the line between right and wrong was not carved in the god stone but drawn by men who changed it when it suited them. Arvid saw only triumph. Einar saw the cost. One night, after a raid that left an enemy hall in ashes, the two sat apart from the others, watching the flames die. The smoke drifted toward the stars, curling into the shape of ghosts. Arvid smiled, satisfied. "Another song for the Skalds," he said. "They'll remember this night." Einar's gaze stayed on the burning ruin. "And those who died? Who remembers them?" Arvid laughed softly, not unkindly. "No one remembers the fallen brother. Only those who rise above them." He clapped Einar's shoulder. "That's how the world keeps turning." Einar did not answer. He only watched the embers fade to ash and felt a strange ache beneath his ribs. In that moment, he understood that he and Arvid stood at the edge of two different worlds, one ruled by vengeance, the other by something gentler, though unnamed. And though they still shared bread, blood, and laughter, fate had already begun to weave its divide. The gods, it seemed, were watching. Tensions in the north were never distant. They always arrived at the doorstep of the unsuspecting. Two jarls, neighbors bound by treaties and bloodlines, had begun to quarrel over the ownership of a stretch of fertile valley and the trade rights along a winding fjord. To the ordinary observer, it might have seemed trivial, a strip of land, a handful of villages, but to men who measured honor in reputation and wealth in power, it was a spark capable of igniting war. The north remembered slights like the wind remembers the shape of the mountains. Nothing was forgotten, and everything carried weight. The quarrel escalated slowly at first, through letters carried by messengers, then through threats, and finally in the subtle shifting of allies and resources. Einar's Jarl was the elder of the two, a man known for his calculated mind and stubborn pride. He had fought in countless battles and held grudges longer than most men lived. The rival Jarl, younger and wilder, commanded a band of men who followed him with loyalty born from fear and admiration. The valley between their lands became a place of tension, a no-man's land where every glance from one side to the other was interpreted as a challenge. Farmers avoided the paths that led too close to enemy territory, and merchants spoke in whispers of raids that might come at any hour. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. For Einar, the growing conflict was both duty and burden. As a warrior, he understood that when jarls argued, men were sent to enforce claims, to protect honor, and if necessary, to take lives. He had been trained to obey, to strike without hesitation, to defend without question. But deep inside, he felt unease. It was not cowardice, nor fear of the enemy's strength. It was a sense that something larger than land or power was at stake, a thread of destiny that might be unraveled by pride and vengeance. Even now, the fjord's cold waters seemed to reflect the tension of the world, restless and dark beneath the winter sky. The village buzzed with the quiet preparation that precedes conflict. Warriors sharpened blades, patched armor, and whispered prayers to Thor and Odin. Mothers tucked their children into fur-lined beds, knowing that the dawn might bring bloodshed. The longhouses were filled with tension, thick as smoke from the hearth. Arvid, ever eager, paced the floor, his eyes alight with anticipation for action. Einar, in contrast, moved slowly, deliberately, each motion measured. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing upon him, the invisible hand of duty urging him forward, even as his heart whispered caution. Among these preparations, spies and scouts moved like shadows along the ridges and forests. Reports arrived in fragments, sightings of enemy movements, rumors of alliances forming, warnings of ambushes. The north was a chessboard, and the jarls were players, but the pawns were men whose lives would be claimed by decisions made far from their homes. Einar watched, listened, and waited. He understood the rhythm of war as if it were a pulse beneath the earth, a constant that could not be ignored. Every choice, every step, carried consequences that would ripple far beyond the moment. One evening, as twilight draped the fjord in shades of violet and silver, Einar and Arvid stood atop a ridge, overlooking the lands in dispute. The river below twisted like a serpent, reflecting the last light of the sun. "Soon," Arvid said, voice low with excitement, "we'll show them who rules here. Their jarl will know not to cross ours." Einar's gaze lingered on the waters, calm yet foreboding. "And if they fight back?" he asked quietly. Arvid laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Then we fight, brother. That is all there is." But Einar could not shake the sense that fighting was only the beginning, and that what came after might be more dangerous than steel or fire. As the days passed, minor skirmishes broke out along the borders. Men tested the enemy's strength, probing for weakness, stealing livestock, and burning isolated homesteads. Each act of aggression escalated the tension, weaving threads of hatred that would not easily unravel. Einar found himself both participant and observer, moving with precision in battle, yet watching the human cost in every fallen figure, in every terrified child huddled in a doorway. The line between right and wrong blurred, and he felt the first stirrings of doubt in a world that demanded certainty. The rival jarl, young and ambitious, sent envoys to demand tribute, speaking with the arrogance of one who expected obedience. The elder jarl, Einar's master, responded in kind, his words measured but unyielding. Pride clashed with pride, each side unwilling to concede even a fraction of honor. The situation became a tinderbox. One misstep, one impulsive act, could ignite a war that no man could contain. And Einar, standing at the center of the storm, felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon his shoulders. He was a soldier, yet he could not ignore the fragile humanity on both sides. It was in this charged atmosphere that Einar first glimpsed the enemy not as a faceless foe but as human. During a brief parley along the riverbank, he saw men tending their wounded, children playing near huts, women carrying water under the shadow of fear. In that instant he recognized what the sagas rarely spoke of, that the enemy lived, laughed, and loved just as he did. The realization did not weaken him in battle. Instead, it planted a seed of empathy, fragile and persistent. He began to understand that honor was not only in victory but in how one treated those who could not fight back, in how mercy could exist even when the world demanded brutality. The tension between the two jarls continued to mount, and both sides began mustering larger forces. The valley, once a peaceful corridor of trade and travel, became a stage for what seemed inevitable. Smoke from burned villages mingled with the morning mist, and the cries of displaced families rose like a chorus of warning. Every day, Einar's mind weighed the cost of action against the demands of duty. The soldiers around him saw only the coming battle, but he sensed something greater, that history itself watched these movements, that each choice would echo long after swords had cooled. In the quiet moments before engagement, Einar often walked along the riverbank, feeling the chill of the north wind against his face. The water moved with silent determination, carving its path through rock and soil with patience far beyond any man's lifespan. He thought of the lives soon to be altered by pride, ambition, and vengeance. In those reflections, he began to see the shape of the choices he would face, that the greatest battles were not always fought with steel, but with heart, with conscience, with courage that transcended the rage of men. And though the war had not yet begun in earnest, Einar understood that his path was already diverging from that of the men around him. What he would do, what he would choose, would define him far more than any victory claimed on the field. The first clash came quietly, almost without warning, on a dawn thick with mist. The valley, usually serene under the soft touch of morning light, had transformed into a landscape of tension and shadow. Warriors lined the ridges, their breaths forming clouds that vanished into the cold air. Einar stood among them, the weight of his axe familiar in his hands, yet the unfamiliar weight of foreboding pressed upon his chest. Across the river, the enemy emerged, shapes blurred by fog, their banners barely visible. It was a scene both timeless and cruel, a mirror of countless battles that had begun with anticipation and ended with grief. The silence before the fight was heavy, filled with the collective heartbeat of men poised between life and death. Arvid leaned toward Einar, eyes alight with the thrill of the coming storm. "Today, we carve our names into memory," he whispered, almost reverently. Einar nodded, but his mind lingered elsewhere, on the children hiding behind walls of timber, on mothers clutching infants, on the realization that every movement would shape more than the battlefield. In that quiet, he felt a flicker of fear, not of dying but of losing something far greater, his sense of what was right. When the horns sounded, the clash was sudden, violent, and overwhelming. Steel met steel, and the air was filled with cries that echoed against the mountains. Men surged forward like waves, relentless and unfeeling. Einar moved through the chaos with precision, his body trained to respond instinctively to danger. Yet, in each encounter, he felt the echo of a life beyond the fight. A fleeting glimpse of humanity in the enemy's eyes, the recognition that the men before him were brothers in all but name. Each swing of his axe, each parry, was a negotiation between duty and conscience, a balancing act that demanded all his focus. Arvid fought beside him, a whirlwind of motion and noise, striking without hesitation. Einar observed, sometimes smiling at his friend's audacity, sometimes wincing at the recklessness. Where Arvid sought the glory of victory, Einar sought control over the violence, channeling it like a river contained within embankments. He spared a man who had dropped his sword and begged for mercy, a decision that earned a shocked glance from Arvid but filled Einar with an unexpected warmth. It was a small act, almost invisible in the storm of carnage, yet it marked the beginning of a moral awakening that would shape every choice to come. The battle stretched over hours, the fog thickening as if nature itself sought to obscure the horror. Men fell, some screaming, some silent, and the ground was soon slick with the evidence of combat. Einar moved with a calm born of discipline, his senses sharpened to the rhythm of the fight. He could anticipate the enemy's movements, protect his comrades, and yet, in moments of stillness between attacks, he would see the faces of those struck down, faces filled with fear, with confusion, with the sudden, incomprehensible presence of death. And in those faces he recognized a truth the sagas rarely spoke, that every victory bore a weight heavier than gold. As the sun rose higher, revealing the valley in harsh light, the battle's tide began to turn. The enemy faltered, driven back by superior strategy and the unwavering cohesion of Einar's Jarl's forces. Yet even in triumph, Einar felt no joy. His victories were measured in survival, not conquest. The smoke of burning homes and the cries of the wounded haunted him, reminders that the world of men was crueler than any story could capture. He moved among his comrades, assisting where needed, but his mind lingered on the larger cost, the unseen wounds that would fester long after the swords were sheathed. Amid the chaos, Einar's perception of the enemy changed further. He saw the fear of young soldiers who had been dragged into this fight by loyalty and oath, not by desire. He saw the hesitation in some, the subtle acts of mercy, the shared glances that spoke of shared humanity. These observations unsettled him at first. He had been trained to see only threat and target. Yet, the more he observed, the more he understood that the essence of strength lay not only in victory but in restraint. The ability to choose mercy, even when all others demanded blood, became a quiet rebellion within him, a secret defiance that he could not yet articulate. The battle drew to a close as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The mist began to lift, revealing the devastation, overturned carts, splintered buildings, and bodies lying where they had fallen. Survivors moved among the wreckage, some tending the wounded, others mourning the dead. Einar found Arvid nearby, laughing as if the day had been a game, unscathed by what had passed. Einar shook his head, half in exasperation, half in sorrow, and they began the slow work of regrouping their men. The camaraderie of shared survival offered some comfort, but it could not erase the memory of what had been destroyed. In the aftermath, as the men cleaned their weapons and tended their wounds, Einar wandered toward the river that cut through the valley. The water, once disturbed by battle, now flowed quietly, reflecting the soft pink and gold of the evening sky. He knelt and cupped it in his hands, letting the cold trickle over his skin, a reminder of life's persistence. Here, in this simple act, he felt the first stirrings of a moral compass that would guide him in ways that no training or oath could dictate. He understood, at a level deeper than thought, that war was not merely about winning. It was about what one preserved in the process: humanity, mercy, and the quiet dignity of choice. That night, in the longhouse, there was celebration for victory. Torches flickered against timbered walls, songs rose and fell, and warriors boasted of deeds committed under the pale sun. Einar sat apart, listening more than speaking, aware that his silence was a statement as much as any sword stroke. Arvid, oblivious to the internal struggle of his friend, clapped him on the back and spoke of future raids. Einar nodded politely, but his gaze drifted toward the window, toward the valley outside, toward the river that had carried both blood and reflection that day. It was in that quiet contemplation that the first seeds of a different kind of courage began to grow, a courage that would one day define his story far more than any battle ever could. The days following the battle were strangely quiet, as if the valley itself had drawn its breath and held it. Survivors wandered among the ruins of what had once been their homes, eyes haunted by loss, hands trembling as they rebuilt what they could. Smoke still curled from smoldering timbers, and the scent of scorched earth lingered, a reminder that victory was always paid for in more than gold. Einar moved among the men and villagers alike, offering what aid he could: a steady hand, a quiet word, a presence that said, without speaking, that someone had seen what had happened and would remember it. It was in these moments, outside the clamor of swords, that he began to understand the full weight of his role in the world. Arvid, by contrast, seemed untouched by the aftermath. He laughed easily, recounted the battle with exaggeration, and pressed the men to prepare for the next campaign as if nothing had changed. Where Einar saw grief, Arvid saw opportunity. Where Einar saw despair, Arvid saw courage. They moved through the same world, yet their perceptions diverged like paths in a forest. Einar's quiet observation revealed truths the loudest voices refused to hear: the subtle panic in a man cleaning his bloodied axe, the way children avoided the edges of the street, the hesitant step of a woman returning to a door she had barricaded against fear. The North demanded strength, yet he began to see that true strength could coexist with compassion, a lesson he would carry far beyond the valley. It was in this environment of rebuilding and reflection that Einar first met her. She appeared not on the battlefield, nor at the halls of jarls, but quietly, like a note carried on the wind. Her name was Sigrid, a woman of the enemy clan, yet untouched by cruelty. Her eyes held the calm of someone who had seen suffering but refused to be consumed by it. She moved among the injured, tending wounds with practiced hands, offering water and blankets, calming children whose fathers lay dead or missing. To see her was to see a light in the shadow of destruction, a reminder that life could still bloom in places scorched by war. Einar's first thought was disbelief, that such gentleness could exist amid so much violence. They met quietly along the riverbank one morning, the mist still clinging to the water, and words passed between them as softly as the current. Sigrid did not ask about the battle or the spoils. She asked if the men had eaten, if the wounded had enough warmth, if the children had been comforted. Her questions were practical, yet imbued with empathy that seemed almost foreign to Einar. He found himself answering not as a warrior or representative of his jarl, but as a man who understood, for the first time, that the world was wider than the code of swords and loyalty. There was a weight in her presence that he had not anticipated, a gravity that made the wind and water seem quieter, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge her. Over the following days, their encounters grew more frequent, though always brief and measured. Einar observed Sigrid moving through the aftermath, not with the arrogance of conquest, but with the quiet authority of someone who respected the lives she touched. She did not lecture, she did not demand. She simply existed as a presence that encouraged gentleness, a reflection of the North at its most enduring, resilient, patient, alive. For Einar, these moments were transformative. They stirred something dormant within him, a longing not for glory or revenge, but for understanding, for connection, for a sense of purpose that transcended the mandates of war. Arvid noticed the change in Einar, though he could not understand it. He teased, as men often do, for distraction, for hesitation. "You spend too long staring at the river," he said one morning, "as if it holds answers that steel cannot provide." Einar smiled faintly but said nothing. He understood that Arvid could not yet see what he saw, that the river was not simply water, that the quiet reflection of life and death it carried could teach more than any skald, more than any battle. The joke passed between them, yet beneath it lay an unspoken truth. The man Einar was becoming could not fully exist in the same way as the man he had been. Through Sigrid, Einar began to confront the contradictions of the world he had inherited. The enemy, whom he had been trained to hate, was not merely a target or threat. She embodied the complexity of life, strength and gentleness, courage and restraint, loyalty and love. He realized that the path of a warrior need not exclude compassion, that bravery was not defined solely by the swing of an axe but also by the choice to protect, to care, to honor life even when the world demanded otherwise. These revelations were subtle, unfolding in quiet gestures, in shared silences, in the recognition of a human being beneath the veneer of clan and allegiance. Their conversations, brief and careful, often wandered to philosophy and stories rather than politics or strategy. They spoke of the aurora, how it stretched across the sky like ribbons of memory, and of the animals that navigated winter forests with patience unknown to men. They discussed the sagas, not for their battles, but for the lessons hidden in moments of grief, courage, and quiet reflection. Each exchange deepened Einar's awareness of the unseen currents that shaped life, fate, choice, and the delicate balance between action and restraint. He found himself learning more from these moments than from years of combat and instruction. Yet, amid these revelations, the shadow of war never fully receded. Every encounter with Sigrid was a reminder of the fragile truce between clans, of the precariousness of peace in a world defined by honor and vengeance. Einar knew that their friendship, fragile as it was, existed on borrowed time. Every smile shared, every word exchanged, was a defiance of the expectations imposed by lineage and duty. The awareness of danger did not diminish the bond forming between them, rather, it heightened its significance. In recognizing her humanity, he also recognized the limits of the world he had been taught to navigate. By the end of the season, Einar found himself changed. He moved among his people and the survivors with a new lens, perceiving not only the necessities of survival but also the subtler, unrecorded triumphs, the quiet acts of care, the resilience of the wounded, the small mercies extended in secret. He had begun to understand that true honor might not be sung in the halls of jarls but lived quietly, in the decisions that preserved life and dignity amid destruction. And through it all, Sigrid remained a mirror to his emerging consciousness, reflecting possibilities he had never dared to imagine, illuminating a path toward a life defined not solely by sword and loyalty, but by choice and compassion. In the north, where silence could be as commanding as a shout and snow could bury both glory and grief, Einar had found a new rhythm. He carried with him the lessons of battle, the loyalty of his brother in arms, and the quiet revelation of connection through Sigrid. Each day unfolded like a page in a saga that was his to write, balancing the weight of the past with the promise of something uncharted. And though the world remained harsh, and duty called relentlessly, Einar began to see that his story could hold more than revenge and conquest. It could hold understanding, humanity, and perhaps, if he dared, love. The following winter arrived with a ferocity that reminded the North why men measured their lives in preparation and resilience. Snow fell in sheets so dense that the horizon disappeared, and the wind howled through the fjords with a voice that seemed both warning and lament. Fires burned constantly in longhouses, smoke curling into the frozen sky, but even the warmth of flame could not chase away the weight of isolation that accompanied the season. Einar moved among his men with quiet determination, ensuring that supplies were rationed, that the wounded were tended, and that the fragile morale of the survivors did not collapse under the endless cold. Yet even amid this ceaseless vigilance, his thoughts often drifted to Sigrid, to the gentleness she had shown, the quiet courage she embodied, and the way her presence had begun to shape his understanding of life beyond the edge of an axe. The harshness of winter mirrored the tension between duty and conscience that gnawed at Einar. On the one hand, he was a warrior, sworn to serve his jarl, bound by blood oaths and tradition to act with precision and strength. On the other, he had glimpsed another way, a vision of honor measured not only in victory, but in restraint, compassion, and understanding. This duality became particularly acute when the rival jarl, whose lands bordered theirs, demanded tribute in exchange for peace. The messengers arrived on frostbitten horses, their words sharp and uncompromising. The elder jarl, Einar's master, demanded immediate compliance, framing the choice as a matter of survival. To refuse meant war, to accept meant humiliation. Einar felt the weight of both possibilities pressing upon him, a storm as unforgiving as the one that raged outside the longhouse walls. In the still hours before dawn, he walked the ridge overlooking the valley, the wind cutting through his furs as sharply as any blade. Beneath him, the fjord gleamed like iron in the weak light, reflecting the pale shimmer of the snow-covered hills. Einar understood, in a way that only those who have witnessed both violence and mercy can, that life was never simple in the north. Decisions were never solely about right and wrong, but about consequence, perception, and the tenuous thread of survival. He considered the men he led, their trust in him, their reliance on his judgment, and the impossible choices that loyalty demanded. And in that solitude, he began to see the first outlines of a path he had not yet dared to walk, one that would reconcile the warrior he was with the man he longed to become. The presence of Sigrid lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder that the enemy was not an abstraction but human, capable of courage and compassion as much as of pride and vengeance. When he recalled her tending the wounded, her calm voice soothing children who had lost fathers, he felt a stirring of hope that honor could exist outside of battle. He imagined conversations that might be had, understanding that words themselves could become bridges across rivers of hostility. The realization frightened him as much as it inspired him, for the North was unforgiving, and a single misstep could undo all that had been achieved in years of careful navigation. Yet the seed of empathy had taken root, and he could not ignore it, no matter how the winds of tradition and expectation howled around him. As the days of winter lengthened and the nights deepened, Einar began to test the limits of his own restraint. He walked among the men, observing skirmishes of pride and small disputes that flared like sparks in dry grass. He intervened not with anger or threat, but with calm reasoning, guiding conflicts to resolution without bloodshed whenever possible. The men, initially skeptical, began to notice a shift. Einar's influence was subtle yet powerful. He demonstrated that courage was not always loud, that leadership could be measured in the preservation of life rather than the taking of it. Arvid, ever his opposite, watched with both admiration and concern, teasing him for what he called too much thinking for a man of action. Einar smiled but knew that this quiet strength was the only path that could sustain the kind of world he wanted to live in. The harsh winter also brought news from the rival clan. Their scouts had noted Einar's restraint, misinterpreting it as hesitation or weakness. This misperception created an opportunity that could be exploited or avoided if he chose wisely. Einar understood that inaction was itself a choice, and that mercy could be perceived as vulnerability in a world that prized immediate retribution. He considered the consequences carefully, weighing the safety of his men against the larger moral imperative that had begun to guide his decisions. He realized that to act with conscience in such times required a courage more demanding than any battlefield feat. It was a courage rooted not in strength of arm, but in strength of heart. Throughout the long winter nights, Einar found himself reflecting on the broader implications of his actions. The sagas sung in the halls celebrated glory, conquest, and vengeance, but he began to see that the truest measure of a man's legacy might lie in the lives he spared, the mercy he extended, and the quiet wisdom he imparted. The memory of Sigrid became a lodestar, a symbol of what could exist beyond endless cycles of blood and pride. He thought of the children who had survived the valley's devastation, imagining how the lessons he instilled, restraint, empathy, courage, might shape their futures. In these contemplations, he sensed a continuity that went beyond the immediate, a thread connecting past, present, and the possibilities of a future not yet written. The season also demanded practical vigilance. Supplies were scarce, and men grew restless, testing the limits of patience. Einar organized hunting parties, ensured that stored food was distributed fairly, and guided repairs of damaged homes and fortifications. He did so with the same precision and care he had applied in battle, but with a gentleness that fostered trust rather than fear. In doing so, he discovered that leadership founded on empathy and foresight could be more enduring than that founded solely on force. The men began to look to him not just as a warrior, but as a guide, a steady presence in the turbulence of life in the north. As the first hints of spring began to pierce the winter's grip, Einar sensed a shift, not in the land but in himself. The lessons of the season had solidified, that mercy was not weakness, that empathy could coexist with strength, and that the choices of a single man could ripple outward in ways unseen yet profound. He carried with him the quiet conviction that the world could be changed, even within the harsh constraints of tradition, duty, and expectation. And through it all, the memory of Sigrid, her presence and her unwavering humanity remained with him, a constant reminder that even in the coldest, harshest winter, warmth could exist, and that the heart could chart its own path, no matter how treacherous the world might appear. The thaw came slowly, like a cautious promise, seeping into the valley and softening the rigid contours of winter's grip. Rivers began to swell with melted snow, carrying with them the debris of the cold months, yet also offering a glimmer of renewal. Einar walked along the riverbank, observing the currents, noticing how the water moved with determination, carving paths through rock and soil over centuries, a patient force that required no violence to assert its power. In this quiet observation he found a parallel to his own path, the necessity of persistence, the importance of shaping the world with intention rather than simply responding to the chaos around him. The valley, scarred by battle, now seemed to breathe again, tentative and fragile, yet alive. The days of rebuilding that followed demanded both strength and diplomacy. Villagers who had endured winter's harshness now faced the lingering tension of uncertain allegiance. Some were loyal to Einar's jarl, others to the rival clan, and still others simply wished for survival. Einar moved among them, not as a conqueror, but as a mediator, listening more than speaking, observing more than commanding. He had learned that victory in battle was only one form of influence. The real test of leadership was in the way men and women trusted him with their lives, their children, their homes. And trust, he realized, required more than promises. It required empathy, patience, and the demonstration that one could wield strength without cruelty. Sigrid returned to the valley during this time, quietly arriving with supplies and aid for the survivors. Her presence, unannounced and unassuming, carried a weight heavier than any jarl's decree. She moved through the streets with purposeful calm, tending wounds, helping repair homes, comforting the frightened, and offering counsel where decisions needed to be made. Einar observed her from a distance at first, marveling at the balance she maintained between authority and gentleness. Unlike the men he had fought beside, whose voices demanded attention, her influence was subtle yet pervasive. The way she acted reminded him that power need not be loud, that courage often appeared in restraint rather than action. Their first conversation after winter's end was cautious, but no less meaningful. Standing on the edge of the river, the thawing waters rushing at their feet, they spoke not of battle or politics, but of life itself. Sigrid described her own experiences, the struggles of maintaining peace among divided families, the quiet victories of care and understanding, the small acts that often went unnoticed but rippled outward in unforeseen ways. Einar listened, absorbing her words not just with his mind but with a deep, visceral awareness. Each sentence carried lessons he had not learned in the longhouses or on the battlefield, lessons about patience, perspective, and the power of measured action. The spring also brought challenges, as the rival jarl observed Einar's restraint with suspicion. Misinterpreting his measured actions as weakness, he tested the boundaries of the truce, sending scouts and raiders to probe defenses. Each incursion was minor, but each carried the potential to ignite broader conflict. Einar's response was deliberate. He defended without escalation, protected without provocation, and sought resolution without unnecessary bloodshed. The men under his command began to notice the difference in strategy. a focus on survival, on protection, on long-term outcomes rather than immediate satisfaction. In this, Einar's influence grew, not through fear or intimidation, but through respect earned from deeds rooted in conscience. Arvid, as ever, remained a contrasting force. He chafed at Einar's caution, at the careful approach that tempered action with thought. "You watch too much, way too much," he would say with a grin, though the worry beneath his words was apparent. "The world respects only those who strike first, who leave no doubt of strength." Einar would nod, accepting the jibe, yet internally he understood that strength was multifaceted. Physical prowess, while necessary, was insufficient alone. True influence required understanding human nature, reading intentions, anticipating consequences, and, most importantly, maintaining one's own moral compass in the face of external pressures. It was a lesson not learned in war, but in the quiet moments between battles. As the valley's inhabitants began to rebuild, the presence of women and children reminded Einar of the broader purpose behind his actions. He witnessed mothers tending gardens, fathers repairing homes, children learning once again to play without fear. In these scenes, he recognized that the work of a warrior extended beyond the battlefield. It was the preservation of life, the cultivation of hope, the assurance that the cycle of survival could continue without perpetuating needless hatred. Sigrid often worked alongside these villagers, her hands as skilled with repairs and herbs as any man's with sword or shield. Together, she and Einar embodied a new form of leadership, one rooted not in dominance, but in the quiet cultivation of resilience and respect. Amid these rebuilding efforts, Einar began to reflect deeply on the nature of loyalty and enmity. The men who had once been his enemies were now neighbors, survivors whose lives intertwined with his in ways both fragile and profound. He saw how easily hatred could be perpetuated, but also how deliberately it could be broken. Each decision, each act of mercy, was a brick in the foundation of a new understanding, that enemies could be transformed into allies, that honor could exist beyond vengeance, and that courage could manifest in restraint as much as in battle. This realization reshaped his conception of what it meant to be a warrior and, more importantly, what it meant to be human. The relationship between Einar and Sigrid deepened during this season. They met under the quiet canopy of trees along the riverbank, sharing thoughts and observations about the land, the people, and the cycles of life. Their conversations, though often simple, carried profound resonance. She challenged him to consider perspectives he had never entertained, encouraged him to reconcile duty with conscience, and inspired him to envision a world where power could be wielded with wisdom rather than fear. In her presence, he felt the stirrings of a connection that transcended clan and conflict, a bond of shared understanding and mutual respect, delicate yet enduring. By the end of spring, the valley had transformed. Where once there had been devastation, there was now cautious renewal. Homes were repaired, fields replanted, and the rhythms of life resumed, though forever marked by the scars of winter and war. Einar observed the fruits of patient leadership, seeing how small acts of empathy and courage could ripple outward, shaping the lives of many. The men he led began to emulate his example, balancing strength with consideration, instinct with reflection. And through it all, Sigrid's influence remained a guiding presence, reinforcing the lessons of restraint, compassion, and quiet strength. The sun has climbed higher, bathing the valley in a warm, golden light that illuminates every corner of the village. The air is filled with the gentle hum of activity, each sound precise, measured, and purposeful. Villagers move through their routines with a deliberate grace, carrying out tasks that have been perfected over generations. There is an almost hypnotic rhythm to the way they work, speak, and even pause, a cadence that mirrors the steady flow of the river and the slow sway of the trees. Every motion, every glance, and every word is purposeful, yet performed with a calmness that suggests centuries of repetition and refinement. In the center of the village, the square is alive with subtle motion, an orchestrated harmony of labor and life that feels both ancient and immediate. Near the communal ovens, women move fluidly as they knead dough and tend to vegetables, their hands skilled from years of practice. Each loaf of bread is formed with care, each bundle of herbs tied with precision, and each movement carries an unspoken acknowledgement of tradition. Children gather nearby, observing and occasionally assisting, learning the delicate balance between work and observation. The adults guide them with gentle instruction, allowing mistakes but using them as lessons in patience and awareness. Through this seamless transmission of knowledge, the younger generation becomes intertwined with the daily rituals of the village, absorbing the rhythm of life as naturally as they breathe. The blacksmith's forge emits the deep, resonant sound of hammers striking metal. Sparks fly upward in brief, fiery arcs, illuminating the faces of the blacksmith and his apprentice. Their motions are synchronized, a careful dance honed over countless hours of practice. Each blow is deliberate, each adjustment precise, a demonstration of mastery that blends functionality with artistry. Tools, farm implements, and small pieces of metal are shaped not simply to serve immediate need but to honor a tradition that spans generations. The apprentice watches closely, internalizing the flow of movement, the weight of the hammer, and the rhythm of the craft. In these moments, labor transcends mere survival. It becomes a meditation, a dialogue with history, and a testament to continuity. By the river, villagers are engaged in daily chores that, while seemingly ordinary, hold deep significance. Water is drawn, washed, and carried with care, each action performed in mindful acknowledgement of its necessity. A fisherman adjusts his nets, the gentle murmur of the river accompanying each precise movement. Children play along the banks, but even in their laughter, there is an innate respect for the space and the flow of life around them. The river itself feels alive, a constant yet ever-changing presence that sustains and teaches the village. Its waters reflect the sky, the trees, and the passing figures in a shifting mosaic that mirrors the balance and continuity of life. In the gardens, rows of vegetables and herbs stretch in neat lines, meticulously maintained by the villagers. Each plant is tended with a combination of knowledge, observation, and care, ensuring that the cycles of growth are respected and optimized. Elderly women kneel in the soil, guiding younger hands, pointing out subtle signs of disease or ripeness, demonstrating the knowledge that has been accumulated over generations. The work is physical, yes, but also contemplative. It embodies the village's understanding that survival is not merely about effort, it is about attentiveness, awareness, and harmony with the rhythms of the natural world. Near the hilltops, fields of crops sway gently in the breeze. Farmers move deliberately, checking rows for damage, adjusting irrigation channels, and ensuring the health of the soil. Their work is both practical and meditative, a balance of observation, intuition, and labor. Even small tasks, repairing a fence, carrying water, pruning a branch, are approached with care, each one contributing to the stability and continuity of the village. Conversation among the villagers is quiet, functional, yet warm. Instructions are exchanged without urgency, and guidance is offered with patience. Here, communication is as much about teaching and observation as it is about conveying information. The village square itself serves as a hub, not of chaos, but of measured interaction. A few elders sit upon stone benches, observing the flow of life, offering advice when sought, and occasionally sharing stories that impart lessons through example rather than lecture. Children pass by, some carrying small tasks, others stopping briefly to listen or exchange a glance of understanding. There is a fluidity in these interactions, a seamless integration of labor, learning, and social cohesion. Every movement, whether physical or social, reinforces the interconnectedness of the community, strengthening the bonds that have allowed the village to endure for centuries. The scent of cooking fills the air as the day progresses, a subtle yet constant reminder of sustenance and home. Meals are prepared with care, ingredients sourced from the fields, gardens, and local animals. Cooking is not rushed. It is a ritual, an act of mindfulness that nourishes both body and spirit. Villagers gather to share food, offering guidance and learning to the young, reinforcing the principles of care, respect, and patience. Even small exchanges, a nod of approval, a smile, a comment on the quality of a loaf or stew, serve as reinforcement of the communal values that underpin every aspect of life. By late morning, the rhythm of the village is fully established, a delicate balance of labor, observation, teaching, and reflection. The blacksmith pauses to adjust tools, the gardener inspects plants. The farmer straightens a line of crops. Even minor acts, cleaning a window, sweeping a doorstep, feeding an animal, are performed with precision and care, demonstrating the village's commitment to continuity. This meticulous attention to detail ensures that each day is meaningful and contributes to the preservation of life as it has been lived for generations. There is a profound satisfaction in observing these cycles, understanding that life here is not measured by speed or volume, but by presence, awareness, and the unbroken transmission of knowledge. In these mid-morning hours, the village reveals its extraordinary resilience. There is no chaos, no distraction, only a measured, purposeful flow of activity where every individual understands their role and their contribution to the larger whole. Life is deliberate, yet natural, disciplined, yet gentle. The village exists as a living testament to the enduring power of patience, continuity, and conscious effort. You sense that this balance, cultivated over centuries, is the true foundation of their survival, and that it is preserved not by force, isolation, or luck, but by a quiet, collective commitment to living deliberately in harmony with the land, each other, and the rhythms of time itself. Autumn descended on the valley with a quiet inevitability, painting the landscape in shades of amber, gold, and crimson. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and the distant tang of smoke from early hearth fires, signaling preparation for the approaching winter. Einar walked among the villagers, observing the subtle shift in mood that the season brought. There was a sense of urgency tempered by reflection, as harvests needed to be gathered, repairs completed, and defenses readied against the harsh months ahead. Yet beneath the practical concerns, a deeper rhythm resonated, a reminder of the passage of time, the cycles of life, and the impermanence of victory and peace alike. The work of leadership during this season demanded meticulous attention. Einar coordinated harvests, ensuring food was stored equitably and that no family went hungry. He inspected fortifications, reinforcing weak points that could become vulnerabilities during winter's storms or from opportunistic attacks. Every decision required foresight, balancing immediate needs with the long-term sustainability of the valley. In this, he discovered a new dimension of responsibility, the awareness that survival depended as much on planning and prudence as it did on courage and skill in battle. A misstep now could undo months of careful rebuilding and imperil lives, a weight he carried with solemn diligence. Sigrid continued to be a steadfast presence, working alongside Einar yet allowing him the space to exercise judgment and authority. Her contributions were subtle but profound, counseling villagers, mediating disputes, and ensuring that the moral lessons of mercy and cooperation were reinforced across the community. She did not seek recognition or authority. Her influence manifested in the trust and respect she inspired. Einar observed her closely, understanding that leadership could exist beyond the sway of fear or obligation, that it could thrive in the quiet cultivation of human connection, empathy, and guidance. Together, they formed a balance of strength and conscience, action and reflection, which proved vital in the delicate interlude before winter's return. During the autumn weeks, Einar encountered reminders of the broader tensions beyond the valley. Scouts brought news of shifting alliances among neighboring clans, skirmishes along distant fjords, and whispered ambitions of rival jarls testing the limits of existing truces. These reports were unsettling, a reminder that the world beyond the valley remained unpredictable and often cruel. Yet Einar approached each development not with rash aggression, but with careful consideration. He weighed responses, anticipating both immediate effects and long-term consequences. In doing so, he honed a philosophy that integrated moral judgment with pragmatic leadership, the understanding that mercy could coexist with vigilance, and that strength expressed through wisdom could surpass the results of brute force. The villagers, too, reflected the changing season in their attitudes and actions. Harvest festivals were modest yet celebratory, a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. Children played in the falling leaves, learning both the joys and the responsibilities of life in the north. Farmers shared techniques, passed down from generation to generation, ensuring continuity of knowledge and resilience. Einar's presence in these moments was not as a ruler demanding obedience, but as a participant in shared survival, a steady figure guiding without overshadowing, teaching without dictating, demonstrating the principles that had begun to define his approach to leadership. The relationship between Einar and Sigrid deepened further during this time. They spent hours discussing not only the immediate needs of the valley, but the philosophical underpinnings of their choices. Conversations wandered through reflections on justice, the nature of courage, and the legacy of one's actions. Sigrid's insights often challenged Einar to consider possibilities he had not previously entertained, encouraging him to reconcile his warrior instincts with the emerging moral compass that guided his decisions. Their bond grew not from romance alone, but from a profound alignment of values, vision, and shared purpose, an understanding that true strength included the capacity to preserve life as fiercely as one would defend it. As the harvest drew to a close, Einar also devoted time to reflection on his past actions and their consequences. He remembered the first battles he had fought, the men he had killed, the choices he had made under pressure, and the flickers of mercy he had begun to practice even amid violence. Each memory reinforced the realization that history often celebrated deeds of courage in combat, but overlooked the quiet, unseen acts that shaped communities and preserved human dignity. Einar recognized that his legacy would be measured not merely by battles fought or enemies vanquished, but by the lives he had touched, the wisdom imparted, and the morality upheld amid the pressures of survival and duty. Autumn's challenges extended to the spiritual and emotional spheres as well. The shortening days and lengthening nights prompted reflection on mortality, the impermanence of life, and the cycles of loss and renewal. Einar walked the valley at dusk, observing the interplay of light and shadow across the fields, contemplating the fleeting nature of time. He thought of those who had fallen in previous battles, of the families who had suffered, and of the fragile bonds that had begun to form across clan lines. In this meditation he found both humility and purpose. Humility in recognizing the limits of his control, and purpose in understanding that deliberate, compassionate action could create ripples far beyond the immediate moment. Arvid continued to challenge him, testing both patience and philosophy. "The world will not wait for reflection," he remarked one evening as they prepared for a minor raid by opportunistic bandits. "It punishes hesitation." Einar considered the words carefully, acknowledging the reality that vigilance and decisive action remained necessary. Yet he balanced this with discernment, choosing to engage with strategy rather than force alone. Through these experiences, he refined the integration of conscience and pragmatism, understanding that leadership demanded both courage and wisdom, both readiness for conflict and the restraint to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. By the end of autumn, the valley had achieved a delicate equilibrium. Crops were stored, defenses strengthened, and relationships between clans had stabilized, though always tentatively. Einar had grown into a leader whose authority rested not merely on fear or martial skill, but on the consistent demonstration of integrity, empathy, and thoughtful judgment. The villagers respected him not only as a protector, but as a guide, a moral compass in a world often devoid of such clarity. Sigrid's influence remained intertwined with his, reinforcing the principles of cooperation, humanity, and foresight that now defined the valley's recovery and continuity. As the last leaves fell and the first frosts dusted the ground, Einar found moments of quiet reflection along the river. The sun dips lower toward the horizon, spilling a soft, amber glow across the village. The long shadows stretch across cobblestone streets and wooden doorways, painting a canvas of light and shadow that feels almost sacred. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint scent of smoke from hearths, mingled with the earthy aroma of tilled soil and ripening herbs. A subtle hush settles over the village, the kind of silence that is not empty but rich with anticipation, reflection, and the quiet rhythm of life. Even as activity slows, the pulse of the village is unmistakable, present in the movement of animals returning to their pens, in the soft footsteps of villagers tending their final tasks, and in the whisper of wind through the trees. Inside homes, fires are stoked and bread is removed from the ovens, releasing a warm, comforting scent that wraps the village in domestic familiarity. Families gather around tables, arranging the evening meal with care, each action performed deliberately. The clinking of wooden utensils and the gentle murmur of voices creates a soft, harmonious background, underscoring the quiet beauty of routine. Children sit attentively, learning through observation as older family members move with practiced grace, chopping, stirring, and distributing portions. Every action is deliberate, every gesture measured, each one a continuation of a tradition passed down over centuries. There is a sense here that life is not hurried, that every moment is to be observed, experienced, and valued. The blacksmith returns from the forge as the heat of the day diminishes, wiping sweat from his brow and setting tools in their places. Sparks still linger faintly in the air from earlier work, reflecting the last rays of sun through small windows. He pauses for a moment to observe the village square, noting the fading light on stone walls and the slow movements of neighbors finishing their labors. Even this pause is purposeful, a quiet reflection on the work completed and the day's accomplishments. The apprentice tidies the forge, following unspoken instructions and absorbing the rhythm of daily responsibility. It is in these small routines, repeated consistently over generations, that the essence of the village's endurance is revealed: dedication, care, and mindfulness in every action. Near the river, the water glistens with a soft luminescence, reflecting the fading sun in gentle ripples. Villagers gather briefly to check nets, tend to animals drinking from the banks, or simply observe the calm flow. Children play quietly along the edges, their laughter subdued as the day winds down. The river seems to slow in response to the waning light, its murmur a gentle accompaniment to the village's softening rhythm. The villagers' relationship with the river is one of respect and quiet intimacy, a recognition that its life-giving presence is integral to the continuation of their own. Every movement here is deliberate, performed with care and attention, reinforcing the harmony between human activity and nature's enduring flow. In the gardens, the last harvest of the day is gathered with careful hands. Herbs are clipped and laid to dry, vegetables placed in baskets, and the soil is gently tended one final time before nightfall. Women move through the rows methodically, observing each plant, adjusting supports, and removing any signs of disease or decay. Their movements are graceful and precise, almost meditative, as they work in harmony with the natural rhythm of growth and decay. Children assist where they can, learning the subtleties of care, the patience required, and the attention necessary to sustain life. These lessons, imparted through demonstration rather than instruction, become part of their very understanding of the world, ensuring the continuity of knowledge and practice across generations. The village square itself begins to quiet as evening approaches. Elders sit on benches, observing the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and motion across familiar spaces. Their presence is both comforting and instructive, offering guidance through observation, small gestures, or a softly spoken word. Young villagers pass by, pausing to acknowledge the wisdom before returning to their tasks or play. Every interaction, every glance, every nod is part of an unspoken dialogue that reinforces social cohesion and the understanding of communal roles. These small, deliberate acts, repeated over time, become the backbone of the village's enduring structure, binding people together in ways that are both functional and deeply human. By mid-evening, the communal ovens release the aroma of bread, roasted vegetables, and herbs, signaling that the evening meal is ready to be shared. Villagers assemble slowly, each movement deliberate, each step measured. Conversation is soft and purposeful, allowing everyone to speak and be heard, reinforcing the principles of patience, respect, and attentiveness. Food is distributed with care, portions adjusted thoughtfully, and moments are taken to offer guidance, share wisdom, or simply express gratitude. Meals are more than sustenance. They are ritual, reflection, and reinforcement of the social fabric that sustains life in this timeless community. Outside, lanterns are lit along the lanes, casting a warm, flickering glow that transforms familiar streets into a landscape of soft light and gentle shadow. The glow illuminates the stone walls, wooden doors, and trees, giving the village an almost ethereal quality. Villagers move along these pathways with quiet intent, completing minor tasks before nightfall, tending animals, or visiting neighbors briefly. The gentle illumination reinforces a sense of safety, continuity, and connection, turning the streets into spaces of reflection and calm as the day transitions into night. Near the chapel, a small group gathers for evening prayers, the candlelight flickering across stone walls and wooden pews. Their voices are soft, harmonizing with the subtle sounds of the evening, the murmur of the river, the rustle of leaves, the distant footsteps along lanes. These rituals are unhurried, intimate, and deeply rooted, providing a sense of grounding and continuity. Even the youngest villagers observe quietly, learning the cadence, tone, and rhythm of devotion. It is a moment of collective reflection, reinforcing both spiritual connection and the enduring rhythm of communal life. As the sun disappears behind distant hills, the valley is bathed in the deep blue and silver tones of twilight. The village breathes softly, its heartbeat slow and measured, synchronized with the natural cycles of day and night. Windows glow warmly, chimneys exhale thin streams of smoke, and the faint hum of conversation drifts through the lanes. Children prepare for bed, their laughter softened, their energy mellowed, while adults complete the final tasks of the day, ensuring that every responsibility is attended to with care. In these moments, the village embodies the quiet dignity of continuity, balance, and presence. Walking through the lanes, you notice the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and movement that defines the village at dusk. Every doorway, window, and garden tells a story of centuries-long continuity, of human presence intertwined with the natural world. The night has fully settled over the village, the sky a deep velvet black, studded with 1,000 stars. There is a stillness here, almost sacred in its quietude, as though the entire world holds its breath. The moon casts a gentle, silver light across the landscape, revealing the soft undulations of the hills surrounding the valley, and casting long, haunting shadows over the stone cottages and thatched roofs. The wind has died down, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. The village seems suspended in time, as if caught in a moment of eternal calm. Inside the homes, the warmth of the hearths continues to radiate, flickering softly against the encroaching darkness. The rhythmic sound of wood burning, crackling and popping, is a steady background to the quiet conversations, the light hums of lullabies, and the soft movements of those winding down from a long day's work. The children, now asleep in their beds, rest quietly under the weight of the day's lessons. Lessons in labor, in love, in belonging. The elders sit in their chairs by the fire, their faces relaxed in a peaceful familiarity, as they reflect upon the day, exchanging words only when necessary, enjoying the comfort of each other's presence. The rhythm of the village's existence is mirrored in the stillness of the night. Outside, the village is bathed in a quiet tranquility, each stone and beam glowing with an almost ethereal light under the moon's gaze. The lamps that line the streets flicker gently, casting elongated shadows that dance across the cobblestones. There is no rush, no anxiety in the air. Instead, there is a quiet sense of completeness, as though the village has, for a brief moment, synchronized with the rhythm of the universe itself. It is a moment where time slows, and every individual breath feels like part of a much larger, timeless exhale. The river, always present, carries on its steady path, its flow unbroken by the night's descent. The water gleams in the moonlight, a continuous thread weaving through the valley, unhurried, unwavering. The sounds of the night are subtle, the soft murmur of water, the distant chirping of crickets, the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, but they combine into a lullaby, comforting and gentle. These sounds seem to speak of a world in harmony, where the passage of time is measured not in minutes or hours but in the enduring cycles of nature. The village, nestled in the valley, exists in symbiosis with this timeless flow. In the silence of the night, the village feels like a living entity, breathing slowly, deeply, contentedly. The homes stand like sentinels, each one a small universe of its own, yet all bound together by the invisible threads of tradition, continuity, and the shared rhythm of life. The stillness of the night is not an absence, but a presence, a moment of pause between the pulse of day and night, a brief space where the labors of the waking hours are laid to rest. This is the essence of life in the village, a slow, deliberate pace, where time is not something to be rushed through but something to be felt, savored, and experienced in its fullness. The calm of the night speaks not just to the quiet of the world but to the deep peace that settles in the hearts of those who call this place home. Here, there is no need for distraction or escape. The peace is inherent, woven into every action, every interaction, every gesture. It is a reminder that the most profound moments of life are often the quietest ones, when the world slows, and we are left with only the steady rhythm of our own existence. In the stillness, the village continues, not in a rush but in a soft, enduring pulse. This is the rhythm of life, a rhythm built on the understanding that existence, in its truest form, does not need to be loud or fast. It simply needs to be present. And in this village, under the moonlit sky, presence is everything. The evening has fully descended now, and the village, bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, has settled into its nighttime rhythm. The sounds of the day, footsteps on cobblestone, the murmur of voices, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, have quieted. The only sounds now are the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant call of an owl, and the soft, steady flow of the river that weaves through the village. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of fresh earth and the warm, comforting smoke of hearths burning. Lanterns flicker along narrow streets, casting pools of golden light that reflect off the stone walls, highlighting the textures of the centuries-old buildings and the worn pathways that stretch like veins through the village. The lantern light creates a sense of intimacy, as though the entire village is cocooned in a shared, collective embrace of warmth and quiet comfort. As the evening deepens, the rhythm of the village shifts from labor to rest, but even sleep is not rushed. Villagers continue their small rituals, lighting final lanterns, securing shutters, checking animals one last time, and tidying spaces before heading inside. The pace is deliberate, grounded, as though every action, no matter how small, carries significance in maintaining the harmony of the village. In the houses, families gather in quiet corners, some reading by the light of a small fire, others reflecting in the stillness of the night. Even the children, now tired from the day's work and play, retreat to their beds with a quiet, settled sense of belonging. It is in these final moments of the day that the true power of continuity is felt. Nothing is hurried, nothing is forced. The day closes with a gentle hand, as if the earth itself is taking a deep breath before the world begins again. Out on the hills surrounding the village, the last rays of the sun disappear behind the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of twilight and the rising moon. The air is cooler now, a reminder that the seasons will inevitably change, but the rhythm of life remains unbroken. The silence here feels almost sacred. Time seems to stretch and pause, and in the stillness, you sense the quiet endurance of the village, its roots sunk deep into the earth. In this place, continuity is not a concept but a living, breathing reality that persists through the cycles of day and night, season after season, generation after generation. The night promises rest, but even as the village sleeps, there is a quiet knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same slow, deliberate rhythm, the same care, attention, and harmony that have sustained this place for centuries. The village is a microcosm of resilience, a reminder that in a world ever-changing, there is beauty in the persistence of the familiar, in the power of repetition and care. As the days grew longer and the first signs of warmth spread across the valley, Einar felt the weight of the years behind him, but also the quiet anticipation of the years ahead. He had shaped a legacy, not one of victory in battle or domination, but one of resilience, wisdom, and moral strength. The valley, once on the brink of collapse, now thrived under a leadership grounded in compassion and strategic foresight. The people, once fragmented by fear and conflict, now worked together as a unified community, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Einar's journey had transformed not only him but the very essence of what it meant to lead. He had come to understand that true power was not in forcing others to submit, but in empowering them to thrive. As the seasons shifted and the valley blossomed, he knew that the work was far from over. Challenges would continue to arise, but the foundation they had built together, rooted in trust, cooperation, and empathy, would endure. Through his leadership and Sigurd's steady influence, Einar had forged a path that others could follow, one marked by quiet strength, moral clarity, and a relentless commitment to preserving the life and dignity of all. The future, uncertain as it always is, no longer seemed a source of fear. Instead, it felt like an open field, ripe with potential, ready to be cultivated by the very hands that had nurtured the valley to life. And so, with the first light of spring warming his face, Einar walked forward, not with the burden of a leader who had fought to survive, but with the hope of a man who had learned how to lead with the wisdom of the seasons.